1 year had passed since the harvesters first appeared at the edge of human space. The war that was supposed to last 72 hours had instead become something no one could have imagined. It had become a transformation that changed both species forever. Admiral Chris Parker stood in the observation deck of the newly built Unity station, watching ships from dozens of different worlds working together in space. Human vessels flew alongside converted harvester craft and ships from the 7 liberated civilizations. The Zenthari had rebuilt their crystal cities, but now they floated in formations that seemed to dance rather than follow rigid geometric patterns. The Drakmor warriors had learned to fight with creativity instead of just discipline. The Murdai had emerged from their oceans to explore new worlds they had never dreamed of visiting. Chris had been promoted to oversee the integration of all these different species into what they now called the Galactic Freedom Alliance. It was a job that required skills no military academy had ever taught. How do you organize a government that includes beings who think as individuals and others, who are still learning what individual thought means? The former harvester, known as Entity 7741, approached Chris at the observation window. The alien being had chosen to call itself Marcus, after a human engineer who had helped it understand the concept of friendship. Marcus still looked like the other harvesters, tall and thin with metallic skin, but something about its posture and movement seemed different, more relaxed, more curious. "Admiral Parker," Marcus said in carefully pronounced English. "I have completed my report on the integration of Sector 7. Chris took the tablet that Marcus offered him. The report was written in a style that mixed harvester precision with something that could only be described as personality. Marcus had developed what humans recognized as a sense of humor, and its reports often included observations that were both accurate and amusing. "How are the other former collective members adapting?" Chris asked. Marcus tilted its head in a gesture it had learned from watching humans think. "Some adapt quickly to individual consciousness. Others find the experience frightening and prefer to remain in small group minds. We have learned that there is no single correct way to exist." This was perhaps the most important lesson that had emerged from the war. Every civilization that the harvesters had conquered had sought perfection in its own way. The Zenthari had perfected technology, the Drakmor had perfected warfare, the Murdai had perfected adaptation. Each had become predictable in their excellence, making them vulnerable to an enemy that fed on predictability. Humans had never achieved perfection in any single area, and that had saved them. Their strength came from diversity, adaptability, and the willingness to try new things even when they might fail. Captain Nicole Roberts commanded the exploration ship UES Discovery, which was leading joint human harvester missions into uncharted regions of the galaxy. Her crew included beings from a dozen different species, all working together to explore worlds that had never been visited by any of their civilizations. "Captain Roberts to Unity Station," Nicole reported over the long-range communicator. "We've discovered something incredible in the outer spiral. There's an entire section of space that the harvesters never conquered. Hundreds of civilizations that are still completely unknown to us." This was exciting news. The galaxy was much larger and more diverse than anyone had realized. For millions of years, the harvesters had been moving through space in predictable patterns, conquering civilizations that followed logical development paths. But there were entire regions where evolution had taken different turns, creating societies that were so unusual that even the collective consciousness had avoided them. "What kind of civilizations?" Chris asked. "One species seems to communicate entirely through color changes in their skin. Another builds cities that exist in multiple dimensions at the same time. There's even one civilization that appears to make all their decisions by having massive planet-wide dance competitions." Chris smiled. A year ago, such descriptions would have sounded impossible. Now they sounded like potential new friends and allies. Dr. Andrew Hill had become the leading expert on what philosophers were calling the human principle. His research facility on New Geneva Station was dedicated to understanding why some civilizations survived contact with the unknown, while others did not. The key factor, Andrew explained to a gathering of representatives from 37 different species, is not technological advancement or military strength. It's the ability to remain flexible when faced with new challenges. Andrew's research had revealed patterns in how civilizations developed over time. Most species eventually reached a point where they optimized their society for efficiency and predictability. This made them successful in the short term, but vulnerable to unexpected challenges. Humans never reached that point of optimization, Andrew continued. Our evolution was shaped by constant environmental changes that forced us to remain adaptable. We developed not specialized perfection but generalized problem-solving abilities. The audience included Xanthari scientists who could manipulate energy with their thoughts, Drakmor warriors who could fight in any environment, and Merdai explorers who could survive in the depths of space. But they were all learning that their greatest strength came not from their individual abilities, but from working together in unpredictable combinations. A Xanthari engineer might work with a human artist and a former harvester mathematician to solve a problem that none of them could handle alone. The solutions they created were often chaotic and inefficient, but they worked in situations where perfect solutions would have failed. Commander Frank Lopez had been appointed as humanity's first galactic coordinator, responsible for managing relationships between all the member species of the new alliance. His office was located in the council chambers of New Geneva Station, where representatives from dozens of worlds gathered to debate the principles of their emerging civilization. Frank stood at the back of the main assembly hall, watching delegates argue passionately about everything from trade agreements to artistic expression standards. The arguments were loud, confusing, and completely unpredictable. Different species had different ideas about how society should work, and no one was willing to simply accept what others believed. A year ago, Frank would have seen this as chaos and inefficiency. Now he saw it as the most beautiful thing in the galaxy. Every voice was being heard, every idea was being considered. No single group could impose its will on all the others. The Xanthari delegate was arguing for scientific research stations that would study the fundamental nature of reality. The Drakmor representative wanted to establish training academies where warriors from different species could learn from each other. The Merdai ambassador proposed underwater cities where aquatic and land-dwelling species could work together. Dawitir, former harvesters, now calling themselves the individuals, wanted to create art museums where they could display the creative works they were learning to make. They had discovered that creating something beautiful for no practical reason was one of the most satisfying experiences they had ever known. The council recognizes Representative Marcus of the individuals, Frank announced. Marcus stood and addressed the assembly in the careful, precise manner that former harvesters used when speaking publicly. Fellow beings, Marcus said, we have learned that the strength of our alliance comes not from agreement but from diversity. When we were part of the collective consciousness, we achieved perfect harmony through uniform thought. But perfect harmony created perfect predictability, which led to stagnation. The assembled delegates listened carefully. The individuals had a unique perspective on the dangers of too much organization and efficiency. Now we experience something the collective never knew, Marcus continued. We experience growth through conflict, discovery through disagreement, and strength through accepting that we cannot predict or control everything. The applause that followed came from dozens of different species, each showing approval in their own way. Some clapped hands, others flashed colored lights, still others made musical sounds. The noise was chaotic and uncoordinated, but it was also joyful and alive. Captain Rebecca Scott was leading the effort to rebuild the worlds that had been damaged during the war. Her teams included engineers from every member species, working together to create something that had never existed before. Cities designed for multiple species with completely different needs. On the former Xanthari homeworld, floating crystal, spires now shared space with underground Merdai pools and open-air Drakmor training grounds. Human parks and gardens were connected to harvester meditation centers by walkways that defied traditional architectural principles. The buildings don't make logical sense, Rebecca reported to the council. A Xanthari energy lab is built directly above a Drakmor weapons testing facility, with a human daycare center in between. By any reasonable standard, it should be a disaster. But it works, Frank asked. Better than anything we've ever built before. The Zenthari children learn about energy by watching the scientists work above them. The Drakmor warriors practice with weapons powered by Zenthari technology. The human children play games that teach them about different alien cultures. Everyone learns from everyone else. This was the new model for galactic civilization. Instead of each species developing in isolation, they were growing together in ways that created possibilities none of them could have achieved alone. Dr. Sarah Kim had established the first interspecies academy, where young beings from different worlds could learn together. Her students included human children, young Zenthari who glowed with curiosity, Drakmor cubs who wrestled playfully in the hallways, and newly individual harvesters who were experiencing childhood for the first time in their lives. Teaching them is the strangest and most wonderful challenge I've ever faced, Sarah told visitors to the academy. You can't use the same methods for species that think in completely different ways, but that's exactly what makes it work. Human children learned mathematics by watching Zenthari students manipulate energy equations in three-dimensional space. Young Drakmor learned about art by collaborating with human students on paintings that showed what courage looked like from different perspectives. Former harvester individuals learned about emotion by working with Merdai children on projects that expressed the feeling of swimming through deep water. The academy had no standardized curriculum, because standardization would have defeated the purpose. Instead, students learned by exploring whatever interested them, guided by teachers who encouraged questions rather than demanding specific answers. What's the most important thing you've learned? A visitor asked one of Sarah's students, a young, human girl named Emma. That there's no single right way to think about anything, Emma replied. My friend Zeth sees colors when he does math problems. My friend Kayla thinks in music instead of words. My friend Marcus 7 used to be part of a big shared mind, but now he makes sculptures that show what loneliness feels like. The visitor looked confused. But how do you communicate if you all think so differently? Emma smiled. We don't communicate the same way. We communicate in lots of different ways at the same time. It's like making music with instruments that sound completely different but somehow make beautiful songs together. Commander David Chen was leading the most ambitious project in the New Alliance's history. His team was building what they called the Diversity Engine, a massive space-based research facility where representatives from every known species could work together on problems that no single civilization could solve. The Diversity Engine was designed using principles that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. Instead of efficient organization, it used creative chaos. Instead of logical workflows, it encouraged random collaboration. Instead of predictable outcomes, it celebrated unexpected discoveries. We're trying to answer the big questions, David explained to reporters. How did life begin? Are there other galaxies with intelligent species? What happens to consciousness after death? Questions that require every possible perspective and way of thinking. The facility looked like a three-dimensional maze built by beings who had never heard of architectural planning. Laboratories designed for aquatic research were connected to zero-gravity workshops by tunnels that spiraled through gardens where energy-based life forms could rest and think. Scientists from different species worked on the same problems using completely different approaches. A human physicist might study quantum mechanics using mathematical equations, while a Zenthari researcher examined the same phenomena by directly manipulating quantum fields with their mind. A Drakmor theorist might approach the problem by thinking about it as a form of combat between competing forces. The chaos is the point, David said. When you get enough different perspectives working on the same problem, sometimes you discover solutions that no one could have found alone. General Laura Martin had been promoted to head of Galactic Defense, responsible for protecting the Alliance from external threats. But the nature of military strategy had changed completely since the war with the Harvesters. We're not preparing to fight enemies anymore, Laura explained to the Defense Council. We're preparing to make friends with beings who might be so different from us that we can't even recognize them as intelligent life. The defense fleet now included ships designed not for combat, but for communication with unknown species. Instead of weapons that could destroy planets, They carried artistic displays, musical instruments, and translation computers programmed with thousands of different languages and communication methods. Our greatest weapon is our ability to surprise ourselves, Laura said. Every time we encounter something new, we learn new ways to be flexible and adaptable. That makes us stronger, not weaker. The Alliance had also established first contact protocols based on everything they had learned from the war. Instead of approaching unknown civilizations with logical diplomatic procedures, human-led teams would make initial contact using creative and unpredictable methods designed to demonstrate that they were not a threat. We've learned that predictable behavior is often interpreted as aggressive by species that have been hurt by others in the past, Laura explained. When we approach new civilizations in ways that seem chaotic and harmless, they're more likely to trust us. As Frank stood in the council chambers watching representatives from 43 different species argue about the best way to explore a newly discovered star cluster, he reflected on how much everything had changed. A year ago, humanity had been facing extinction at the hands of an enemy that had never been defeated. 7 civilizations had fallen in exactly 72 hours each, and it seemed certain that humans would be the 8th. But humans had refused to accept that fate. They had fought back using the one weapon that the harvesters could not counter: the willingness to be unpredictable, chaotic, and beautifully imperfect. In saving themselves, humans had also saved their enemies. The harvesters were no longer a collective consciousness focused on optimization and efficiency. They had become the individuals, millions of beings learning to think and create and dream for themselves. The galaxy now belonged to no single pattern or philosophy. It belonged to endless possibility, infinite diversity, and the courage to face the unknown without knowing what would happen next. Every civilization had fallen easily except the humans, not because humans were superior, but because they had never forgotten the most important lesson in the universe: that strength comes not from perfection, but from the willingness to keep growing, keep changing, and keep discovering new ways to be alive. The stars belonged to everyone now, and they always would. 120 hours had passed since the harvesters arrived in human space. 5 full days of fighting, and humanity was not only still alive but actually winning battles. The impossible had happened. The enemy that had conquered 7 civilizations in exactly 72 hours each was now struggling against humans who refused to follow any logical pattern. Captain Alan Foster stood on the bridge of his ship, the UES Wildcard, preparing for something that no human had ever attempted before. His fleet was about to launch the first offensive attack into harvester-controlled space. Instead of just defending Earth and its colonies, humans were going to try to take back territory that the enemy had captured. Alan's fleet was unlike anything that had ever existed in human military history. His ships were a mixture of captured harvester vessels, rebuilt human craft, and completely new designs that his engineers had created by combining technology from both species. Nothing in his fleet worked the way it was supposed to, and that was exactly the point. "All ships, this is Foster," he said into his radio. "Remember, we're not trying to fight like a proper military force. We're trying to confuse the enemy so much that they can't figure out what we're doing." The plan for the offensive was based on everything humans had learned about their enemy over the past 5 days. The harvesters expected logical military strategies. They expected formations, tactics, and predictable behavior. So humans would give them the exact opposite. Alan's fleet moved toward the harvester forces near the asteroid belt in a formation that looked like children's toys scattered across a floor. Some ships flew upside down. Others spun in circles as they moved forward. A few were flying backwards while shooting in random directions. To any military observer, it looked like complete chaos. But Alan knew that chaos was humanity's greatest weapon against an enemy that thrived on order and predictability. Commander Tracy Hughes was leading the ground assault team that would attempt to liberate the first harvester-occupied world. Her target was a small mining colony that the enemy had captured during their initial advance. The colony had been home to 15,000 humans before the harvesters arrived. Now it was completely empty, its population taken along with everything else of value. Tracy had studied the reports from the other 7 civilizations that had fallen to the harvesters. In every case, the enemy had established control by setting up predictable patrol patterns, logical defensive positions, and efficient resource extraction operations. They turned conquered worlds into perfectly organized machines designed to strip away everything useful. But Tracy's assault plan was designed to be perfectly disorganized. Her Marines would attack from multiple directions at random times using whatever weapons they could find. Some would use advanced military equipment, others would fight with tools they had found in abandoned workshops. Some would attack openly, others would sneak around and cause problems wherever they could. "Listen up, everyone," Tracy told her forces as they prepared to land on the colony world. "We're not trying to win this battle through superior firepower or brilliant tactics. We're trying to drive the enemy crazy by doing things that make no sense." Her landing craft approached the planet's surface in a pattern that looked like someone had thrown darts at a map while blindfolded. Instead of landing at strategic locations, they touched down wherever seemed like it might be interesting. Some Marines landed near important facilities. Others landed in empty fields for no particular reason. The effect on the Harvester defenders was immediate and dramatic. Enemy forces that had been programmed to respond to logical military assaults found themselves facing humans who seemed to be making up their strategy as they went along. Dr. Kevin Walsh had made the most important discovery in human history when he accidentally connected to the Harvester collective consciousness. Now he was working with a team of scientists and engineers to turn that discovery into a weapon that could end the war. Kevin's research had revealed that individual Harvesters could think independently when they were cut off from their collective network. More importantly, these independent Harvesters seemed to be curious about concepts like creativity, emotion, and individual choice, things that their collective consciousness had never experienced. General Williams, Kevin reported from his laboratory, "We've successfully separated 12 Harvester soldiers from their network. The results are remarkable." Kate hurried to Kevin's lab to see what he had discovered. In a secure holding area, she found 12 Harvester beings that looked completely different from any enemy soldiers that humans had encountered before. Instead of moving with mechanical precision, they seemed uncertain and curious. Instead of following programmed behaviors, they were exploring their surroundings like children, seeing the world for the first time. "They can think for themselves now?" Kate asked. "Not only that," Kevin replied. "They're asking questions. They want to understand concepts like art, music, and individual personality, things that don't exist in their collective consciousness." One of the separated Harvesters approached the viewing window. It was tall and thin, with skin that looked like metal but moved like flesh. When it saw Kate, it did something unprecedented for its species. It waved. "It's trying to communicate," Kevin explained. "We've been teaching them human languages and cultural concepts. They're learning incredibly fast." Kate watched as the Harvester drew pictures on the wall of its holding cell. The images were crude but recognizable. A human figure standing next to a Harvester figure. Both figures appeared to be smiling. "Have you tried asking them about their collective consciousness?" Kate asked. "Yes, and that's where it gets really interesting. They describe it as being like a dream where you know everything but can't choose anything. They say that being separated from it is like waking up for the first time." This discovery changed everything about how humans understood their enemy. The Harvesters were not evil conquerors who enjoyed destroying civilizations. They were prisoners of their own perfection, trapped in a collective mind that had optimized away their individuality and freedom. Captain Beth Rodriguez had successfully captured and converted an entire Harvester fleet near Saturn. Her engineering teams had learned to modify the alien ships by introducing random elements into their control systems. The result was a fleet of vessels that worked perfectly well, but in completely unpredictable ways. "Admiral Clark, this is Rodriguez," she reported. "We've got 37 converted Harvester ships ready for combat. Fair warning, though, we have no idea what they're going to do when we use them." The converted ships had been modified using what Beth's engineers called creative sabotage. Instead of trying to understand how the alien technology worked, they had simply added human components wherever they seemed to fit. The result was ships that combined Harvester efficiency with human unpredictability. One ship might fire its weapons, in perfect formation 1 minute, then shoot rainbow-colored beams the next. Another might fly in a straight line, then suddenly decide to perform barrel rolls for no apparent reason. The ships were functional but impossible to predict, even for their own crews. When Beth's converted fleet engaged the remaining Harvester forces near Jupiter, the battle became something that had never been seen before in galactic history. Harvester ships fighting against other Harvester ships but with completely different behaviors and capabilities. The psychological impact on the enemy collective consciousness was devastating. Their own technology was being used against them, in ways they had never imagined. Ships that should have responded predictably were instead acting like they had developed personalities of their own. Major Steve Bailey was leading a special forces team that had managed to board and capture a Harvester command ship. The boarding action had been planned using what his team called interpretive assault tactics. Instead of following standard military procedures, his soldiers had attacked the ship using movements inspired by dance, music, and abstract art. The Harvester defenders had been completely unprepared for enemies who moved like they were performing, rather than fighting. Steve's team had swept through the ship's corridors following patterns based on jazz improvisation and modern poetry. By the time the enemy figured out what was happening, the humans had already taken control of critical systems. "General Williams, this is Bailey," Steve reported from the captured command ship. "We've got control of one of their primary vessels. And General, you need to see what we found in here." Steve's team had discovered something incredible inside the Harvester command ship. The vessel contained thousands of individual Harvesters who were not fully connected to the collective consciousness. They seemed to be in some kind of suspended state, neither fully part of the hive mind nor completely independent. They're dreaming," Steve reported. "Dr. Walsh needs to see this. I think we might have found a way to wake up the entire Harvester species." Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Wood was leading the most dangerous mission of the war. Her team was attempting to infiltrate the main Harvester fleet and plant devices that would disrupt their collective consciousness network. The devices had been designed by Dr. Walsh based on his research into how human creativity could interfere with alien thought patterns. Rachel's infiltration team moved through space in ships disguised as floating debris. They approached the enemy fleet using flight patterns that looked like random space junk being pushed around by solar winds. The Harvesters had learned to ignore such objects because they posed no apparent threat. Once inside the enemy formation, Rachel's team began planting their devices on key Harvester ships. The devices were designed to broadcast human music, poetry, and art directly into the alien communication network. The goal was to introduce so much chaos and creativity into the collective consciousness that it would break down completely. "Planting device number 7, Rachel reported quietly over her radio. "So far, the enemy hasn't noticed us. These ships are so focused on logical threats that they can't see illogical ones." The devices began broadcasting as soon as they were activated. Human music flowed into the Harvester network, followed by poetry, paintings converted to digital signals, and recordings of children playing and laughing. The collective consciousness had never encountered anything like it. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Harvester ships throughout the fleet began showing signs of confusion and disorientation. Some stopped moving entirely, as if their crews were listening to the strange new sounds flowing through their minds. Others began moving in irregular patterns, as if they were trying to dance to music they had never heard before. Ambassador Julie Nelson had been chosen for perhaps the most important diplomatic mission in human history. She was attempting to establish formal communication with the Harvester collective consciousness itself. Julie was a career diplomat who had spent years learning to communicate with alien species, but nothing had prepared her for this challenge. Using the communication link that Dr. Walsh had discovered, Julie found herself in direct contact with a mind that spanned millions of individuals across thousands of worlds. It was like trying to have a conversation with an entire civilization at once. "We wish to understand," the collective voice said in Julie's mind. "Your species demonstrates behaviors that violate optimal efficiency principles. Yet you achieve strategic objectives through seemingly random actions. Explain this phenomenon. Julie took a deep breath before responding. How do you explain creativity to a mind that had never experienced it? How do you describe individual choice to beings who had always moved as one? We don't always know why we do things, Julie said. Sometimes we act based on feelings rather than logic. Sometimes we do things just because they seem interesting or fun. Sometimes we make mistakes and learn from them. This is inefficient, the collective responded. Mistakes reduce optimal outcomes. But mistakes also lead to discoveries, Julie replied. When we try something new and it doesn't work the way we expected, we sometimes find better solutions by accident. We call it creativity. The conversation continued for hours, with Julie trying to explain concepts like art, music, humor, and love to a mind that understood only efficiency and optimization. Slowly, gradually, the collective consciousness began to ask questions about what it might be like to experience these strange human emotions. Back on Earth, General Williams watched the tactical displays showing the current state of the war. For the first time since the fighting began, more harvester ships were being captured or converted than destroyed. Human forces were not just surviving, but actually winning. Dr. Price, she called to the AI expert. How long before their collective consciousness breaks down completely? Nathan looked at his instruments and calculations. Based on current disruption rates, maybe 6 hours, but General, I don't think it's going to break down. I think it's going to evolve. Kate looked at him with surprise. What do you mean? The harvesters aren't being destroyed by our chaos, they're learning from it. Individual units are starting to develop what we would recognize as personalities. They're becoming more like us instead of less like themselves. This was something that no one had expected. The war that had started as humanity's desperate fight for survival was turning into something much more profound. Two species that had evolved along completely different paths were beginning to learn from each other. The galaxy would never be the same again. 96 hours had passed since the harvesters first arrived in human space. The 72-hour deadline that had marked the end of 7 civilizations came and went, but humanity was still fighting. The battle had spread across the entire solar system, from the outer asteroid fields to the moons of Jupiter. Admiral Tony Clark stood on the bridge of his flagship, the UES Revenge, watching the tactical display that showed the current state of the war. The numbers were not good for humanity. They had lost over half their ships and thousands of soldiers, but they were still here. Still fighting, still refusing to give up. What surprised Tony the most was how the nature of the battle had changed. In the first few days, it had been chaos. Human commanders using random tactics, ships crashing into each other by accident, Marines making up strategies as they fought. It should have been a disaster. But something strange had happened. The longer the battle continued, the better humans seemed to get at fighting an enemy they did not understand. While the harvesters grew more confused by human unpredictability, humans were learning to use that confusion as a weapon. Captain Beth Rodriguez had survived the destruction of her ship during the second day of fighting. Now she commanded a small fleet of captured harvester vessels that her engineering teams had somehow managed to get working. Beth had no idea how the alien technology functioned, but her crew had figured out how to make the weapons fire and the engines move. Admiral Clark, this is Rodriguez, she said over the radio. We're approaching the enemy formation near Saturn, requesting permission to try something completely insane. Tony smiled despite the desperate situation. After 4 days of fighting, harvesters, completely insane, had become standard military procedure for human forces. Permission granted, Captain. What do you have in mind? We're going to use their own ships to attack them, but we're going to fly them upside down and backwards, while playing Earth music at full volume, through their communication systems. Any other admiral in human history would have court-martialed an officer for suggesting such a ridiculous plan. But Tony had learned that ridiculous plans sometimes worked better than sensible ones when fighting an enemy that expected everything to make sense. Approved. Try to bring back some of their technology if you can. Beth's small fleet of captured ships approached the harvester formation, flying in ways that defied every rule of space combat. The human crews had no idea how to properly operate. The alien vessels, so they flew them like they were piloting garbage trucks instead of warships. They rolled, spun, and zigzagged through space while broadcasting human music so loudly that it overwhelmed the Harvester communication networks. The effect on the enemy was immediate and visible. Harvester ships began firing on Beth's fleet, but they hesitated before each shot. Their targeting computers could not predict where the human-controlled ships would be, because the humans themselves did not know where they were going. Meanwhile, the music seemed to cause something like confusion in the Harvester collective consciousness. The alien ships began moving in slightly different patterns, as if they were having trouble coordinating with each other. Dr. Nathan Price was monitoring the battle from his laboratory on Earth. Nathan was humanity's leading expert on artificial intelligence and computer systems. He had been studying the Harvesters for months, trying to understand how their minds worked. What he had discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The Harvesters were not just advanced aliens. They were a collective consciousness, a single mind shared across millions of individual bodies. Every Harvester ship, soldier, and worker was connected to every other one through a network that spanned across space. This collective mind had evolved over millions of years to achieve perfect efficiency. Every decision was made by analyzing countless possibilities and choosing the one most likely to succeed. Every strategy was tested against thousands of different scenarios before being implemented. It was like playing chess against a computer that could calculate a million moves ahead. But Nathan had identified a critical weakness in this perfect system. The collective consciousness could only function properly when it could predict what its enemies would do. It needed patterns to analyze, strategies to counter, logical behavior to respond to. Human behavior was not logical. Humans made decisions based on emotions, instincts, random ideas, and pure stubbornness. They did things that made no sense from a tactical standpoint but somehow worked anyway. The Harvester collective mind had no framework for understanding this kind of thinking. "General Williams," Nathan called from his computer station, "I think I know why we're still alive." Kate hurried over to look at Nathan's research. His screens were covered with graphs and charts showing Harvester communication patterns. "Look at this data," Nathan said, pointing to a series of jagged lines on his monitor. "This shows the communication traffic between Harvester ships. In every previous battle, these lines were smooth and regular. Perfect coordination." He switched to a different graph. "But look at what's happening now. The communication patterns are becoming erratic. There are delays, interruptions, even what looks like arguments." "Arguments?" Kate asked. "I thought they were a hive mind." "They are, but it's starting to break down. The collective consciousness is designed to process logical information and make optimal decisions. But our behavior is so random and unpredictable that it's causing errors in their decision-making process." Kate studied the graphs. "You're saying we're giving them the equivalent of a computer virus?" "Exactly. Every time we do something that makes no tactical sense, it creates a small error in their collective thinking. After 4 days of fighting us, those errors are starting to add up." This was the breakthrough that humanity had been hoping for. For the first time, they had an enemy that could be defeated not through superior weapons or better strategy, but through sheer unpredictability. Major Rick Thompson was leading an engineering team that had been given perhaps the strangest assignment in military history. His job was to make human technology as random and chaotic as possible. Instead of using their most advanced weapons and most efficient systems, humans were deliberately choosing equipment that was old, unreliable, and unpredictable. Rick's team had taken apart dozens of human starships and rebuilt them using parts that should not work together. They combined engines from different manufacturers, weapons from different time periods, and control systems that had been designed for completely different purposes. The result was a fleet of ships that even their own crews could not fully understand. The weapons might fire plasma beams 1 minute and projectile rounds the next. The engines might accelerate smoothly or suddenly lurch forward without warning. The life support systems might play random music or change the lighting to different colors. To any reasonable military analyst, Rick's fleet looked like floating garbage. But when they engaged harvester forces near Jupiter, something amazing happened. The enemy ships had no idea how to respond to weapons that changed function randomly and ships that moved in completely unpredictable ways. "General Williams, this is Thompson," Rick reported over the radio. "Our experimental fleet just destroyed 12 harvester ships using a combination of mining lasers, fishing nets, and a cargo hauler that we turned into a battering ram." Kate shook her head in amazement. "Understood, Major. Keep doing whatever you're doing." Commander Jenny Wilson was in charge of monitoring enemy communications from her position aboard the space station, Deep Space Nine. Jenny had been a linguist before joining the military, and she specialized in understanding alien languages and communication patterns. For 4 days, she had been listening to harvester transmissions, trying to decode their language and understand their plans. What she discovered changed everything humans thought they knew about their enemy. "General Williams," Jenny called from her station, "you need to hear this. I've managed to decode some of their communications, and they're not what we expected." Kate put on a pair of headphones and listened to the alien transmissions that Jenny had translated into English. What she heard shocked her. The harvesters were arguing with each other. For the first time in their existence as a collective consciousness, individual units were disagreeing about what to do. Some wanted to continue with their standard attack patterns. Others wanted to try new approaches. A few were even suggesting that they should retreat and study the humans before attacking again. "This is incredible," Kate said. "They've never had internal disagreements before." "It gets better," Jenny said. "Listen to this transmission from one of their command ships." The translated voice sounded confused and frustrated. "Unit designations 7741 through 9653 are requesting clarification on response protocols. Human behavior does not match any known patterns. Request permission to develop new tactical frameworks." Another voice responded with what sounded like anger. "Previous frameworks have proven adequate for 2.3 million successful campaigns. Continue with established procedures." But established procedures are failing. Human actions appear random but achieve strategic objectives through unknown mechanisms. Kate listened to several more minutes of translated arguments between different parts of the harvester collective mind. It was like listening to a computer trying to understand why humans did things that seemed to make no sense. The psychological impact on the harvesters was becoming more obvious with each passing hour. Their ships were taking longer to respond to attacks. Their formations were showing small but noticeable imperfections. Some units were even acting independently instead of following the collective will. Marine Colonel Lisa Harper had been fighting on the surface of Mars for 3 days. Her forces had been using tactics that would have gotten her court-martialed in any normal war. Instead of establishing secure defensive positions, her Marines moved constantly, setting up temporary camps that they abandoned after a few hours. Instead of following standard combat procedures, they made up new ones every day. Some Marines fought in small groups, others as individuals. Some used advanced weapons, others picked up rocks and threw them at enemy soldiers. Some wore full combat armor, others went into battle wearing only helmets and boots. The effect on the harvester ground forces was remarkable. Enemy soldiers that had conquered 7 civilizations with machine-like efficiency were now making mistakes. They would set up ambushes for Marines who had already moved to different positions. They would prepare defenses against attacks that never came from the expected directions. "General Williams, this is Harper," Lisa reported from her mobile command post. "The enemy is starting to show signs of what I can only describe as confusion. Their soldiers are hesitating before making decisions. Some of them are even standing around like they're waiting for orders that never come." This was exactly what Dr. Price had predicted. The harvester collective consciousness was breaking down under the strain of trying to process human behavior that followed no recognizable patterns. But the real breakthrough came when Lieutenant Kevin Walsh made a discovery. That changed everything. Kevin was a communications specialist who had been trying to intercept harvester transmissions. While working on captured enemy equipment, he accidentally created a communication link between his human radio and the harvester network. For a few minutes, Kevin found himself connected to the collective consciousness of humanity's greatest enemy. What he experienced was beyond anything he could have imagined. The Harvester mind was vast and ancient, containing the accumulated knowledge of millions of years and countless conquered civilizations. But it was also rigid and inflexible, capable of incredible calculations but unable to understand concepts like creativity, intuition, or random inspiration. When Kevin's human consciousness touched the edge of the Harvester collective, it was like introducing chaos into a perfectly ordered system. The effect rippled through the network, causing confusion and uncertainty in every connected mind. More importantly, Kevin discovered that individual harvesters could be separated from the collective consciousness. When cut off from the network, they became capable of independent thought for the first time in their existence. "General Williams," Kevin called excitedly from his position, "I think I know how to win this war. We don't need to destroy them. We need to teach them how to think for themselves." As the fourth day of battle came to an end, humanity was still alive and still fighting. The Harvesters had failed to achieve their 72-hour victory for the first time in their history. More importantly, they were beginning to experience something they had never known before: doubt. The galaxy watched in amazement as the pattern that had destroyed 7 civilizations was finally broken. Humanity had found a way to fight the unbeatable enemy, not through superior technology or military genius, but through the simple act of being impossibly, chaotically, beautifully human. The alarm bell started ringing at exactly 800 hours on Tuesday morning, Earth Standard Time. Colonel Sam Mitchell was drinking his morning coffee in the command center of Station Omega-7 when the long-range sensors picked up the signatures. He set down his cup and walked quickly to the main display screen, his heart already beating faster. There they were. The Harvesters had arrived at the edge of human space. Sam had been stationed at Omega-7 for 6 years. The space station sat at the very border of human territory, a lonely outpost that watched for threats coming from deep space. It was supposed to be a quiet assignment, monitoring asteroid fields and checking on mining ships. Sam had never expected to be the first person to see humanity's greatest enemy. The enemy ships materialized out of folded space like nightmares given solid form. Sam counted them as they appeared on his screen. 100 ships, 200, 500. The numbers kept climbing until his computer stopped counting at exactly 1,847 vessels. Each ship looked wrong, somehow. They had curves like living creatures mixed with sharp angles like machines. The hulls seemed to shift and move even though they had to be made of solid metal. Strange lights pulsed along their surfaces in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Get me General Williams," Sam ordered his communications officer. "Priority 1, tell her they're here." While he waited for the connection, Sam watched the enemy fleet arrange itself in space. They moved with perfect coordination, forming 7 circles around each other like a target. Each circle had exactly the same number of ships, spaced at exactly the same distances. It was the same formation that survivors had described from the other 7 worlds. General Kate Williams appeared on the hologram projector a few minutes later. She was in her office on Earth, but Sam could see other officers running around behind her. Everyone looked busy and scared. Kate had been preparing for this moment for 3 months, ever since Captain Morrison had brought back news of the Zenthari destruction. "Colonel Mitchell, give me your report," she said. "Ma'am, we have exactly 1,847 enemy vessels at the edge of the system. They're arranged in the standard pattern we studied from the other attacks. No communication attempts so far." Kate nodded grimly. "Any sign of movement toward our inner planets?" "Not yet, ma'am. They seem to be waiting for something, maybe scanning our defenses." "Good. That gives us a little more time. Colonel, I'm uploading the battle plans we've prepared. You know what to do." Sam looked at his computer screen as the files arrived. For 3 months, every human military officer had studied the attacks on the other 7 civilizations. They had analyzed every battle recording, every survivor testimony, every piece of evidence they could find. The plan they had developed was unlike anything in human military history. The first thing that made it different was that there was no single plan at all. Instead, there were dozens of different strategies that human commanders could choose from at random. Some were based on direct assault, others on hit-and-run tactics. Some involved trying to communicate with the enemy, Others involved immediate attack. "Ma'am," Sam said, "are you sure about this? The randomized command structure goes against everything we learned in military school." Kate's face was serious but determined. "Colonel, every other civilization that fought these things used their best military strategies. Perfect formations, logical tactics, predictable responses. They all fell in 72 hours. We have to try something different." Sam understood the logic, but it still felt wrong to abandon military discipline. However, he had read the reports. The Drakmor had been the greatest warriors in the galaxy, and they had lasted 70 hours. If perfect military strategy was not enough, maybe imperfect strategy would work better. "Uploading commands to all fleet commanders now," Sam reported. "Operation Chaos is ready to begin." The human defense fleet had been positioned throughout the solar system using the new strategy. Instead of concentrating their forces in logical positions, the ships were scattered randomly. Some were hidden behind asteroids, others were floating in empty space with their engines turned off. A few were even disguised as space junk or broken satellites. Commander Paul Davis received his orders aboard the battleship UES Guardian. Paul had been a naval officer for 20 years, and he had never seen orders like these before. Instead of a detailed battle plan, he had been given a list of 30 different tactics and told to choose one using a random number generator. He rolled the electronic dice on his computer. The number that came up was 17. Paul looked at his list and found Tactic 17, Ramming Speed Surprise. It was not a tactic he would have chosen himself, but orders were orders. Around the solar system, other commanders were making their own random choices. Captain Beth Rodriguez on the cruiser. Defiant rolled a 12, which meant fake surrender ambush. Major Tony Clark, commanding the destroyer squadron, got number 4, Missile Swarm Chaos. Each commander would be fighting their own separate battle using completely different methods. The Harvesters began their attack exactly 24 hours after arriving in the system. Their ships moved forward in perfect formation, just like they had done 7 times before. Long-range scanners showed them launching the same type of weapons that had destroyed the other civilizations. Clouds of tiny machines that could eat through metal and turn matter into more copies of themselves. But when the first wave of nanobots reached the positions where human ships should have been, they found nothing. The random positioning meant that most of the human fleet was not where the Harvesters expected them to be. Commander Davis watched from his hiding place behind a large asteroid as the enemy ships passed by his position. His tactical computer was telling him to wait for a better opportunity, but his random orders said to attack immediately with ramming speed. Paul took a deep breath and gave the command. All engines full power. Set collision course with the lead enemy ship. His crew looked at him like he had gone crazy, but they followed orders. The Guardian shot out from behind the asteroid like a bullet, heading straight for the largest Harvester ship at maximum speed. The enemy ship tried to turn away, but it was too late. The Guardian smashed into its side, both ships exploding in a ball of fire and metal. Paul and his entire crew died in the collision, but they had destroyed a Harvester ship in a way that no enemy computer could have predicted. Across the solar system, similar scenes were playing out. Captain Rodriguez had her ship broadcast a surrender message, then opened fire with all weapons when the Harvesters came close to capture her. Major Clark launched every missile his squadron had in random directions, creating a chaotic light show that confused the enemy sensors. Dr. Helen Carter was monitoring the battle from Earth's Strategic Command Center. Helen was a specialist in artificial intelligence and computer systems. She had spent months studying captured Harvester technology, trying to understand how their minds worked. "General Williams," she called out, looking at her computer screens. "Something is happening to their response times." Kate hurried over to look at Helen's data. "What do you mean?" "Look at these numbers. In the battles against the Zenthari, the Harvesters adapted to new tactics in an average of 4 minutes. Against the Drakmor, it was 3 minutes and 20 seconds. But they've been fighting us for 6 hours now, and they're still taking over 8 minutes to respond to our attacks." Kate studied the numbers. "You think they're having trouble figuring out what we're doing?" "Exactly. Their advantage has always been that they could predict what their enemies would do. But we're not doing anything predictable. Every human ship is using different tactics, chosen at random. Their computers can't find a pattern to analyze. This was encouraging news, but the battle was still going badly for humanity. Random tactics might confuse the enemy, but they also meant that human forces could not coordinate properly. Ships were accidentally firing on each other, defensive positions were left unguarded, and supply lines were completely disrupted. Lieutenant Colonel Dan Peterson was leading a fighter squadron near Mars when he got his random orders. The computer told him to use tactic number 23, kamikaze confusion. Dan looked at the description and shook his head. It was the stupidest thing he had ever read. According to the tactic, he was supposed to fly his fighter straight at enemy ships, then eject at the last second and let his unmanned fighter crash into them. It was wasteful, dangerous, and made no military sense at all. But Dan had seen what happened to 7 other civilizations that used sensible military tactics. Maybe it was time to try something that made no sense. "All fighters, this is Red Leader," he said into his radio. "We're going to try something new. Follow my lead and eject when I give the signal." Dan picked the biggest harvester ship he could see and flew straight toward it. His fighter's computer was screaming warnings at him, telling him he was on a collision course. Behind him, 20 other human fighters followed in a loose formation. The harvester ship began firing at them, but Dan did not try to dodge. He flew in a straight line until he was only a few hundred meters away from the enemy hull. "Eject, eject, eject," Dan shouted. 21 human pilots shot out of their fighters in ejection seats, floating away in spacesuits while they're empty. Ships continued forward and crashed into the harvester vessel. The enemy ship's shields had been designed to stop missiles and energy weapons, not to deal with entire fighter craft being used as projectiles. The harvester ship shuddered and began to list to one side, its hull cracked open in several places. It was not destroyed, but it was badly damaged, and more importantly, it had happened in a way that made no logical sense. Dr. Carter watched her instruments as more reports came in from around the solar system. The harvesters were still winning the battle, but something was definitely wrong with their performance. Ships that should have adapted to human tactics were instead making mistakes. Formations that should have been perfect were showing small, but noticeable flaws. "General," she said, "I think we're actually confusing them. For the first time in their history, they're fighting an enemy that doesn't follow any logical pattern." "How long can we keep this up?" Kate asked. Helen looked at her calculations. "At our current rate of ship losses, maybe 18 hours. But, General, look at this." She pointed to a graph on her screen. "Our effectiveness is actually getting better as the battle continues. The longer we fight, the more confused they become." This was something that had never happened before. In every previous battle, the harvesters had become more effective over time as they adapted to their enemy's tactics. But human tactics could not be adapted to because there were no tactics. Each human commander was essentially making up their strategy as they went along. Marine Colonel Lisa Harper was leading ground forces on Luna, Earth's moon, when the first harvester landing ships appeared. Lisa had read her random orders 3 times to make sure she understood them correctly. Tactic 41, Organized Chaos Defense. Instead of setting up logical defensive positions, her Marines were supposed to form random groups that changed composition every few minutes. Instead of following standard combat procedures, they were supposed to make up new tactics on the spot based on whatever seemed like a good idea at the time. It sounded like a recipe for disaster. But Lisa had studied the reports from the other worlds. Traditional military tactics had failed 7 times. Maybe it was time to try something completely different. "All units, this is command," she broadcast to her forces. "Forget everything you learned in training. Today we make up the rules as we go along." As the first harvester soldiers landed on Luna's surface, they found themselves facing human defenders who fought like nothing they had encountered before. Some Marines hid behind rocks and sniped at them. Others charged directly into battle screaming and waving weapons. Still others pretended to retreat, then ambushed the pursuing enemies. The harvesters had fought against disciplined armies, desperate civilians, and tactical geniuses. But they had never fought against organized chaos. For the first time in their existence, they began to hesitate before making decisions, their collective consciousness struggling to process the randomness of human behavior. Back on Earth, General. Williams looked at the tactical displays showing battles raging throughout the solar system. Human losses were heavy, but they were lasting longer than any other civilization had managed. The 72-hour countdown had already passed, and humanity was still fighting. For the first time since the harvesters had appeared, Kate allowed herself to feel a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, humans really were different from all the others. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and looked at the screen in front of him. What he saw made his stomach feel sick. The planet below used to be home to billions of creatures called the Zenthari. Now it looked like a dead rock covered in smoke and fire. The Zenthari had been the smartest beings in the galaxy. They could control energy with their minds and build cities that floated in the air. Their crystal towers reached up into the clouds and glowed with beautiful colors. Jake had visited this world 5 years ago when he was just a lieutenant. Back then, the cities looked like diamonds scattered across green fields. Children played in parks made of living light, and scholars worked in libraries that existed in multiple dimensions at the same time. Now all of that was gone. Broken pieces of their cities lay scattered across the planet like broken glass. The green fields were black ash. The floating cities had crashed down and left huge craters in the ground. Nothing moved down there. Nothing lived. Commander Lisa Patterson walked up to Jake with a tablet in her hands. Her face looked worried and tired. She had been reading reports all day about what happened to the Zenthari world. Lisa had been Jake's second in command for 3 years, and he had never seen her look so scared. "Captain, I have the final numbers," she said quietly. It took exactly 72 hours from when the enemy first showed up until the planet fell completely. The last transmission from the surface came in at hour 72, minute 0, second 15. Jake shook his head. 72 hours. 3 days. That was all it took to destroy a civilization that had been building for thousands of years. The same thing had happened to 6 other worlds in the past few months. Always 72 hours. Never more, never less. "Any survivors?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. 17 refugee ships made it out before the end. About 8,000 Zenthari total, out of 12 billion. Lisa's voice cracked a little when she said the numbers. A blue light appeared above the control panel, and Admiral Ryan Cooper's face showed up in the hologram. The old man looked like he had not slept in weeks. His gray hair was messy, and his uniform had wrinkles in it. Jake had served under Admiral Cooper for most of his career. The Admiral was known for being calm and strong, but now he looked like a man carrying the weight of the entire galaxy on his shoulders. "Captain Morrison," the Admiral said, "I need you to come back to Earth right away. Bring all the information you have about what happened here." "Yes, sir," Jake replied. "But Admiral, this makes 7 worlds now. 7 civilizations completely wiped out. What kind of enemy can do this?" Admiral Cooper was quiet for a moment. Behind him, Jake could see other officers running around with papers and tablets. Everyone looked busy and scared. "The kind that might come for us next," the Admiral finally said. "Get back here as fast as you can. We're calling in every ship, every captain, every soldier we have. If these things are coming for Earth, we need to be ready." The hologram disappeared, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts. He had been a ship captain for 15 years, and he had fought in 3 different wars. But he had never seen anything like this. The enemy ships appeared out of nowhere, fought for exactly 3 days, then left nothing behind but empty planets. Dr. Amanda Walsh came onto the bridge carrying a stack of papers and a portable computer. She was the smartest person Jake knew when it came to studying alien life. Amanda had gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and glasses that she was always pushing up her nose. She had spent the last month looking at what was left of the destroyed worlds, trying to understand how this could happen. "Captain, I think I know why they all fell so fast," she said, setting her papers down on a table near the captain's chair. "Tell me," Jake said. He walked over to stand next to her and Lisa joined them. Amanda picked up one of the papers and showed it to him. It had pictures of different alien species on it, along with charts and graphs covered in numbers that Jake did not understand. "Look at this. The Kethavar were masters of technology. They had weapons that could destroy entire moons. Their battleships were the size of small cities, and they had shields that could stop anything. But they fell in 68 hours. She picked up another paper. This one showed pictures of blue-skinned creatures with gills on their necks. The Meridae lived in the oceans and could breathe water. They had cities under the sea that were protected by force fields stronger than anything we have. Their warriors could fight underwater, and in space equally well. 71 hours. Jake looked at the pictures. Each alien race looked completely different from the others. Some had 4 arms, some had tentacles instead of legs, some looked like giant insects with wings. But they all had one thing in common now. They were all gone. Even the Drakmor, Amanda continued, showing him a picture of creatures that looked like armored bears with claws as long as swords. They were the best fighters in the galaxy. They lived for war and had been fighting battles for 1,000,000 years. Everyone thought they could never be beaten. Their entire culture was about becoming perfect warriors. But when these new enemies showed up, the Drakmor lasted exactly 70 hours. Lieutenant Ben Torres was sitting at the communications station listening to radio signals from across the galaxy. Ben was young, maybe 25, and he had joined Jake's crew right out of the academy. He was good with computers and languages, which made him perfect for monitoring alien communications. "Captain," Ben called out, pulling off his headphones, "I'm getting reports that more enemy ships have been spotted near the outer rim. They're moving toward the center of the galaxy. And Captain, there are a lot of them, more than we've seen before." Jake felt a cold feeling in his chest. The center of the galaxy was where Earth was located, where humans lived, where his wife and 2 daughters were waiting for him to come home. "How long do we have?" Jake asked. Ben checked his instruments, typing quickly on his keyboard. Numbers flashed across his screen as he calculated distances and speeds. Based on their speed and direction, maybe 3 months before they reach human space. Could be less if they have faster ships that we haven't seen yet. 3 months to figure out how to fight an enemy that had never lost a battle. 3 months to find a way to break a pattern that had destroyed 7 different civilizations. 3 months to save the human race. Amanda was still looking at her research papers, flipping through page after page of notes and photographs. "Captain, there's something strange about all of this. Each of these races was completely different. The Xanthari were peaceful and focused on science. They spent their time learning and building beautiful things. The Drakmor loved to fight and thought that dying in battle was the highest honor. The Meridae stayed hidden in their oceans and avoided contact with other species for thousands of years." She paused and looked up at Jake. "But the enemy beat them all using the same methods. It's like they knew exactly what each race would do before they did it. Like they had a plan that worked perfectly every time." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. He sat down in his captain's chair and motioned for Amanda to continue. "Well, look at this." Amanda spread several papers out on the table. The Xanthari tried to negotiate first. They sent messages trying to communicate and understand what the enemy wanted. The enemy ignored them completely and went straight to attacking their cities. She pointed to another paper. The Drakmor did the opposite. They attacked immediately with everything they had. Thousands of warships, their best soldiers, weapons that could crack planets. But somehow the enemy was ready for that too. "And the Meridae?" Lisa asked. "They tried to hide. They pulled all their people deep underwater and activated defensive shields that had protected them for centuries. But the enemy found them anyway and drained their oceans dry." Jake thought about this. It was like playing a game where the other player already knew every move you were going to make. No matter what strategy you chose, they had a counter-strategy ready. "What do the survivors say about these enemies?" he asked. Amanda flipped through more papers until she found what she was looking for. It was a transcript of an interview with a Drakmor warrior who had escaped the destruction of his homeworld. They call them the Harvesters. According to this survivor, their ships look like they're alive, made of metal and flesh mixed together. The hulls seem to breathe, and they change shape during battle. They don't communicate at all. They don't make demands or give warnings. They just show up, fight, and take everything. Take everything? Every ship, every building, every piece of technology. Even the people. Amanda's voice got quiet. The planets are left completely empty, like someone came through with a giant vacuum cleaner and sucked up an entire civilization. Jake stood up and walked over to the big window that looked out into space. He could see the other human ships in their fleet floating nearby. There were 12 ships total, all that remained of the exploration fleet that had been sent to investigate. The Xanthari distress signals. They looked so small compared to the vastness of space around them. Behind him, he could hear Ben still monitoring communications. Every few minutes, the young lieutenant would report another refugee ship or another distress call from somewhere in the galaxy. The news was always the same. More worlds falling, more civilizations disappearing. "Captain," Ben called from his station. "Admiral Cooper is sending new orders. All human fleets are being called back to defend Earth and the core worlds. Every ship, every soldier, everyone." Jake nodded. It made sense. If humanity was going to be next, they needed to gather all their strength in one place. But would it be enough? If races more advanced than humans could not last more than 3 days, what chance did humanity have? He thought about his family back on Earth. His wife Sarah worked as a teacher at the local school. His daughters, Emily and Rachel, were 8 and 10 years old. They would be in class right now, learning about math and history and art, not knowing that an enemy was coming that could destroy their entire world in 3 days. "What makes us think we can do better than the others?" Jake asked. Not really. Expecting an answer, Amanda looked up from her papers. "Maybe we can't, but maybe we're different somehow. Each of these other races seem to specialize in one thing. The Xanthari were brilliant scientists. The Drakmor were perfect warriors. The Merdai were masters of hiding and defense. And humans? Humans are messy. We're not the best at any one thing, but we're decent at everything. We fight when we have to, but we also negotiate. We build advanced technology, but we also use simple tools when they work better. We're not predictable like the others." Jake hoped she was right, but looking at the dead world below them, it was hard to feel optimistic. "Set course for Earth," Jake ordered. "Maximum speed." As his ship turned away from the dead Xanthari world, Jake wondered if this would be the last time he saw his home. In 3 months, Earth might be just another empty rock floating in space, and humanity might be just another failed civilization that lasted exactly 72 hours. But something deep inside him refused to accept that fate. Humans had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that should have wiped them out. They had crawled out of caves and reached for the stars. They had made mistakes and learned from them. They had fallen down and gotten back up again. Maybe they could find a way to survive this too. Maybe they could be different from all the others. Maybe, just maybe, they could break the pattern. The stars ahead looked cold and distant, but Jake Morrison flew toward them anyway, carrying the hopes of his species and the determination of a man who refused to give up.